Yes, indeed. Professor Adeliji Nodu joins us next. He is the chair of the CDD's Electoral Analysis Center. Good morning, Prof. Thank you for coming on today.
Nice to be with you.
Okay, so let's take a look at this information that came through from INEC. They like everyone to know and remember that there are 18 political parties. You've got 93 million odd registered voters, 1,491 electoral constituencies in the 774 local government areas, and then 8,809 registration areas. And then note this, 176,846 polling units. A lot of action, a lot of activity will be going on there. And that will be for 15,331 contestants. How many of those do you even know? That seems to be this huge focus on the presidential ones, and who knows? Well, Prof, good morning. Thank you for coming on again today. Well, I'm doing well, thank you, sir. Looking through how the preparation is, the build-up to the elections, we see different activities. In fact, at a certain point, there were some uncertainties. Even as we speak, there are several people who are still hesitant, not sure about how to approach certain things on that election day. So from your analysis, your situation room, what kind of scenario do you see here?
Well, I think that elections in this country, particularly these elections, in terms of the number of registered voters, in the 90 million plus, it requires a lot of national mobilization because elections have historically been viewed or regarded more as the continuation of war by other means because the stakes are high. There are various interests involved. So, and it is something that is beyond the capacity of the Electoral Commission itself to handle. And I say that because election on such a huge scale require partnership between the Electoral Commission and various stakeholders to ensure a seamless electoral process, you know. And it's a very, very, very complex process. But I think looking back over the past 2 or 3 electoral cycles, INEC has made tremendous progress in preparing and getting ready for elections. And in doing that, they have also found it expedient to work with various stakeholders, particularly the civil society groups, the security agencies, and in fact, the ordinary Nigerians to assure them that this is what is at stake, this is what we are doing. So I think if you look at all of that, I think we've made great progress towards that since. And I want to mention in particular the innovation that was introduced, I think, in 2015 or 2011, thereabouts, the Interagency Consultative Committee for Election Security, because of our unique situation. I also need to make one point, though, which the chairman of INEC made some few weeks ago, that if you look at the electoral, the voters, you have 93 million voters in the country. That is more than what you have in the whole of West Africa. In one country alone, taking is more than what you have in West Africa. And then you look at the size of Nigeria, our topography, our terrain, you know, areas that are only accessible by speedboats, areas that are only accepted by helicopters in, for example, in the Mambilla.
And we'll have to get results from those areas.
So in terms of the logistics and the operational requirements, it is not something that INEC alone can do. And then look at the number of ad hoc staff you require.
Millions of them.
Yes, well, but then, so it's a lot of, and so it is a very difficult. So I'm just saying this so that the public can recognize the enormity and the complexity of the problem. But in spite of that, and in spite of the insecurity in the country that we've been witnessing over the past several years, I think I think INEC has done a relatively good work to assure the public. And in terms of assuring the public, I think it has to mention also that INEC has had in place since 2011. They've approached their task through what you call the project analysis in terms of project plan. Learning from past experiences, projecting, and analyzing what are the risks, what are the threats, what are the challenges, and what do we need to do. So all of that is very, 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 very complex. And then you have the large span of control, not just the headquarters, going all the way to the polling unit in a ward in the country. So that long chain of command also has some complexity in terms of effectively monitoring what is going on.
Okay. So, I mean, given our history, we've had this historically boisterous build-up to our elections. Yes. Even on election day itself, the dynamics are usually very different from what we've had over time as well. Yeah. But from your position, I mean, you've your wealth of experience and knowledge, looking at the big picture, how everything is unfolding, what would you say concerns you the most?
Well, let me put it this way. I think the 2023 general elections will be what you characterize as critical elections. And what you mean by critical elections is that they are likely to bring about substantial political realignments in the country. And that is interesting because what causes the realignment is because I think the elite consensus on which party politics since the 1951 general elections, the elite consensus that was emerging, built around the notion of regionalism, federal characters. I think that elite consensus has been breaking down, and I think it is really broken down now. So you will have to reconstitute, find a basis for reconstituting that, because you need an elite consensus. There's no doubt that the elite consensus has broken down. You see it in the two parties, in the two major parties. You even see it in the other parties that are emerging.
So what caused that? Yeah, go ahead.
But what is also interesting about the breakdown of that elite consensus is that these elections are likely to be more competitive. So you have what might call a third force now emerging. The Obi candidate, the Labour Party, the NNPP, they may not win, but they are going to hike off a whole lot of votes from the two major parties because they are now posing a great challenge to them. So they may therefore have a very, very important effect on who emerges the winner.
So for these elections, and what about for future elections?
Well, for future, that's why I'm saying that trend, it may continue.
Oh, okay.
But we cannot really talk of tomorrow. But what I'm saying is that I'm not even sure.
For this scenario.
Yeah, but what I'm saying that looking at what has been going on up till now, it is likely that you'll have a major political realignment. Okay. What I'm sure of is that the elite consensus has broken down. There's no doubt.
Is that good for the polity, for the electorate?
Well, it is part of the unfolding of democratic politics, because it is because democracy is working that elite consensus has broken down, because there are possibilities that have been put up by the democratic transition, and yet we have achieved some of them, but there's still more that we need to achieve. So opposition to that things can be better, things can be better. It's not that all of you keep quiet. This is the big man. So you have that kind of thing. It is a function of our federal structure as well.
All right. Let's bring in our colleagues from Lagos. Please go ahead.
Well, thank you so much, Chamberlain. Good morning, Prof. I must just on the side commend your consistency, zeal. I mean, you're 80 this year. A lot of people might not know that, and you're still, energetic as ever. But, listening to you speak from your experience, you're welcome, from your experience and from, the trends we have seen in our country, just raises the question for me. Yes, for a lot of people, this is a big thing. It's a big deal. Young people, maybe particularly, but Nigerians at large. But there's this concern that has been raised, and it's about what happens after the election. I mean, there's a possibility. I think each of the candidates have, if you're looking at 18 of them, a 5% chance of victory. But I mean, if you streamline it to what people have called the front runners, 4 of them, yeah, you now say 25%. But there's still that 75% chance of losing. And I wonder for you, are you also looking beyond, the elections to when the results are released and how it will be received? Is that something that maybe concerns you? How have you maybe rationalized it in your mind, and how should people approach this essentially?
Yeah, thank you for that observation. I think one has to be modest and agree that you really can't talk about tomorrow, because tomorrow is not here yet. You can only make conjectures. I don't believe in making predictions as a political analyst. I can look at conjectures and say, look, if this happens and that happens, this is what is going to happen. And also that we look at the problem from different lenses. What you focus on may not be what somebody else is focusing on. But I think after you've making that concession, you've given that caveat, I think we can say what can we reasonably infer from what we are seeing. And what I was trying to say, that there is an elite consensus has broken down, and that you now have third parties emerging that are highly competitive with the 2 major parties that we've experienced. And as a process of that consensus building, what has causes that consensus breaking down, what caused it? And if we can know what causes it, then we can then make some projections about what is likely to happen. And I would want to suggest that there are 2 important things that are likely to emerge. I may be right, I may be wrong, but let me just say it now in terms of, what seems to me to be a pattern that is trending. One is that there is no doubt that we need to go back and look at the basis after the elections and the new government have been. We need to look at the basis for a federal structure, and particularly to look at the old question of I will call it the federal character clauses in the Constitution, and how going beyond that, relate that to the power of the presidency, because I think the problem about this elite consensus broken down is really because of the plenitude of powers at the hands of the president, and the whole question of how do you hold the president accountable, the role. So particularly presidential appointments. How do you now do that in a way that will enhance the spirit of the federal character clause of the country? Right. In other words, how do you ensure it? The federal character clauses are important, very, very important. In fact, Kenya, some years back, borrowed that concept from Nigeria. And the African peer review mechanism says that the federal character clauses in the Nigerian code is a very unique experiment, that concept that other African countries still embrace to ensure inclusivity in government, including even the gender issues. But the point also is that in our own experience, the federal character has been abused or misused. And I think the major point at this juncture in our history, the major point is the abuse of the presidential power the power of the presidency is very, very powerful in terms of the plenitude of appointments it can make, ranging from appointments to the Supreme Court, ministers, and so on and so forth. That how do we, and I think the Electoral Reform Committee suggested that what can be done is to look at the electoral system, adopt some form of modified proportional representation, where number of seats won in the National Assembly will be proportional to the number of votes won by political parties. So you don't have a party winning only 70% of the seats, of the votes, and then winning almost 90% of the seats in parliament. Right. And that you also need some form of power sharing ability. So the second thing I think is important that we need to look at later on is that this youth bulge that we are seeing and the interest that they have shown in the political process, how can it be sustained? And how will it cope with the federal character issue? Are the youth going to take issues not based on it is the turn of my ethnic group or it's the turn of your ethnic group, but looking at the candidates, who is the candidate that is fit and fair, and then looking at issues, irrespective of, because I don't see any ideological picture emerging from the youth bulge and the interest in politics beyond, no, we are resisting, we want to be more involved in government. But you don't relate that to the ideological issue of what should be the purpose of government, how should government, what should be the public policy in terms of its orientation and so on and so forth, which is something that has really not emerged in this whole process.
Well,
issues have not been debated.
Well, Prof, you have raised very important issues. I mean, the possibility of maybe power sharing. I know that's something that some have spoken about, but, you know, it looks like winner takes all in this case of Nigeria. And then the youth question, the ideology which you talk about. And, you know, when I talked about the percentage of, I mean, the possibility of those candidates winning, it's not as though to predict, but, you know, based on, I mean, dividing it by 100, if they're 18, that's just about 5% each. And if they're 4, that's just about 25%. And, you know, there's also the chance of them losing, which is why I was asking that. I mean, do you think from the trend we have seen up until today and perhaps the election and afterwards, do you think that some might have difficulty accepting the result of that election, which was like the foundation of that question? Do you have those concerns? Because for some people, it might be win or win, forgetting that it's actually win or lose, and the probability of losing might even be more for their candidate. So is that a concern you have? And how do you think we should begin to, because yes, election conduct is big, but what happens after? How do you think we should begin to approach it? What kind of messaging do you think political parties should begin to tell their supporters and all of that? That's also another side to the question.
No, I think I'm hopeful in that regard. Because if you look at since 1999, losers have gone to court and have abided by the judgments of the court in resolving disputes related to elections. And I think we've established that pattern. You know, no matter what we may say about the judiciary, we may not like the decisions they've made, we may not like they are deciding who should be voters by adding and subtracting votes, and now declaring that this is the winner, instead of allowing the electorate to do that. But that is a problem that is caused by the nature of our electoral politics. And the judiciary will have to intervene in situations where politicians cannot resolve problems on their own. In fact, I think it is because politicians fail to resolve internal problems that it eventually lands in the courts. But I think that is also good, you know, to the extent to which people, you know, but if people start feeling that the courts are being partisan or are emphasizing technicalities over substance, then they will start having serious doubts about the judiciary themselves. So I think the judiciary has a very, very important role to play in, you know, in being seen as standing for justice and not standing for technicalities. Because if people lose that confidence in the judiciary, that will be the last thing for us. And I think we are getting to that level. But I think we have been lucky so far that even people who have been you know, like the governor, who was in power for 3.5 years, have been asked to vacate the position by the courts, and they've abided. And there's been no upheaval as a result of that. So I think I'm quite hopeful about that. What I am still not sure about is that looking forward about the future Nigeria that we want, and knowing that those between the ages of 18 and 50 years are about 75% of the voting population. What is in terms of reproducing our political class, as those who are there now are living, and the new generation is about what legacy are we leaving for them? And that is what I am not sure we are able to do, because I have not seen, out of the youth bulge, the involvement in it, I have not seen any vision of Nigeria coming out of it, other than just that we want to be included in government. So, and I think that has to be more a matter of, you know, how you now, you know, recalibrate the political system, our own political culture, and make it more ideologically focused than ethnic focused. And in this respect, I think it is significant for me that this whole period, the electoral cycle, no one has raised issues about Chapter 2 of the Constitution, because it is quite clear that and in fact, the Constitution of the country says specifically that political parties must, in their manifestos, reflect Chapter 2. But you have political candidates who are talking of returning the economy to the private sector. But Chapter 2 makes it clear that the state must be the driver of the economy. Nobody has talked, in fact, the other someone was even talking about the private sector controlling all of it, but you cannot do that if you want to maintain justice, fairness, equality, and because also of the imperfections of the market system. We are, so we are not all coming to the, and that's the whole point that, this whole notion of that we are all citizens of Nigeria has to be questioned. Because
Prof, you're spewing out a whole lot of ideas, in your commentary, and it's interesting. I'd like us to explore the point of power sharing a bit further because of some of your suggestions about what could possibly happen after the presidential election. Would it be a possibility for the candidate, whoever emerges winner, to bypass the constitutional, obstacle to restructuring? After all, they have all committed in one way or the other to, the unity of Nigeria. And then you talk about the manifesto of the political parties. Would it be a problem, like perhaps an ideological dividing line between and amongst the candidates in this power sharing possibility that could happen after the election results are decided?
You see, I think one of the paradoxes of our political system is that we spend so much money setting up committees to look at things. And the Electoral Reform Committee in 2007, 2008 made a specific recommendation about power sharing. It says that any party that crosses a threshold, it may be 10%, 15%, 20%, they must have a share in government. And in some countries, they do it. So that is why it is not just saying that, well, there is in the cabinet, you follow the federal character clause, and a minister from every state, an ambassador from every state, and so on and so forth. But what is important for power sharing is that going beyond that, political parties that lost elections can also, and contested elections, provided they reach a certain threshold of the total votes cast, then they must have a seat in the cabinet. So that they're not saying that they are forever going to be excluded. And that is the whole point about the plenitude of presidential power. They have the same problem in Ghana. And about 3 or 4 years ago, they were discussing how to limit presidential powers in a way that will make for power sharing, in the sense that all parties, the concept, and we've been playing with this for a long time in this, the concept of a unity government. We right from 1957, 54, 58, 59, when Baliwa said, let there be a unity government before independence. No, it did not, well, some joined, others did not join. But the whole point is that, let's find a way of, and the same thing goes for the powers of the governors. And I even think that the governors' our problem are much more with how the governors have used the plenitude of power they have to distort politics and to try and monopolize politics at the state level. So where options are foreclosed, and this all winner take all things is, and it goes back a long time to what Atolius said, that in an African country, where if you go by first past the post, simple majority, then there are certain ethnic groups that we never think of even having power at the side, because if you go first past the post, the majority will keep on winning. And that was part of the reason why the spread factor at the national level, at the presidential and governorship level, was introduced in '79 to make sure that the president has a spread, has a fair representation throughout the country. That is required. And it is interesting now that that issue is now cropped up again because of the breakdown of the elite consensus, where we now realize that it is possible to have a runoff, because this particular competition election is very, very, very competitive. The second point you raised about ideology, I think it's very, very important that we go back to chapter 2, because this is being violated, the letter is being violated, and the spirit of it also is violated. Because it makes clear that the state must be the major allocator of social surplus, and that whatever you must make sure for equity, justice, and fairness. But for me, it is interesting that none of the political parties, and some of them have even violated it, making reference to it by saying that the private sector must be the leadership. When we know the private sector, the market is not free, and the state has an important role in mediating and making sure that we do not have a situation of two nations in one country. You know, a few that are stupendously rich, wealthy, benefiting from state subsidies, and the majority of us, you know, with no access. So we cannot say it is competitive. You cannot say the market is competitive. The same thing with access to law, to justice. How many poor people can afford to have a good lawyer to defend them in the court? And that is, so I think it also goes to the question of justice, this ideological spread. So that, and what people fought for in the 80s against structural adjustment was that it is now coming back in terms of say, and when you do that, what you're having is that we'll have local entrepreneurs who are merely serving as proxies for external ones.
Well, what a place to let it go. In fact, that's why it is all the more important how we consider the narrative when some people say, well, you don't need certain areas, you don't need to win certain areas to become president. So those are very important conversations and things that we need to factor in moving forward, such that that principle that was introduced in 79 also achieves the purpose, because there was a purpose for which it was introduced. Well, Prof, sadly, we'll have to let it go at this moment, but this is a matter that we will need to consider in the days ahead moving forward, such that we can give it the pride of place and mainstream these kinds of narratives. So we sincerely appreciate your perspectives and time this morning, Professor Adele Jinodu, who is the chair of the CDD's Electoral Analysis Center. Thank you very much indeed for coming on, Prof.
Thank you. It's always a great pleasure to be at Channels.
All right, sir.
Thank you.
We will be back in just a moment. Stay with us.